Night owls reveal the most terrifying things witnessed while the world slept. This happened one summer night a couple of years ago. I had all the windows in the house wide open, trying to catch some of the fresh, early morning air. My house is located right in front of a main road, and there's a bus stop almost at my front door, so the sounds of people who've had too much to drink or late-night wanderers aren't unusual to me. It was around 1 a.m. My baby was already asleep, and I was relaxing when I heard what I identified as drunken shouting. They were high-pitched screams, no words, just shrieks. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just teenagers being stupid, like so many other times, but the sound didn't stop. It was always the same voice, and, strangely, I didn't hear anyone else accompanying it. The screams began to drift away toward the neighboring town, fading into the distance. I went downstairs and looked out the windows toward both sides of the road, but the street was deserted. I couldn't go out to investigate because I was alone with the baby, so I went back to bed, but the adrenaline had already woken me up completely. I stayed silent, listening. A short time later, the screams returned. They were coming from the distance, getting closer to my position again. I ran downstairs, got my phone ready, and peeked out the window. Then I saw a girl ran past my house at full speed, letting out those heartbreaking shrieks. She wasn't asking for help, she was just screaming. You could tell she was under the influence of something or in a state of absolute shock. I yelled from the window, asking if she needed help, but she didn't even look at me. At that moment, I started dialing the police, and that's when I saw him. A man was coming down the street. He wasn't running. He was walking at a fast, steady pace with a mechanical determination. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't calling out to her. He was simply stalking her, maintaining a constant distance like someone hunting prey they already know is exhausted. "I've already called the police!" I screamed at the guy with all my might. He stopped dead in his tracks under the streetlight. While I gave his physical description to the police dispatcher, the man turned around and vanished into the shadows of an alley. Minutes later, the officer on the phone confirmed that a patrol car had intercepted the girl a few blocks away and that she was safe, but they found no trace of the subject. Sometimes, when the memory comes back to me, I can't help but analyze why that guy looked so calm. It terrifies me to think that he didn't want the police called because his plan wasn't a quick attack, but a hunt of attrition. He wasn't shouting so as not to attract the neighbor's attention. He knew that if she was intoxicated and just screaming without words, people would think she was just another drunk and close their windows. He was waiting for her to tire out or move into a dark zone to act. The fact that he vanished as soon as I mentioned the authorities confirms to me that he knew exactly what he was doing, hunting in silence, waiting for the moment when no one was watching. Cultural note. In urban security incidents, the bystander effect is often broken when a resident acts as an active observer from a safe position, their home. The term shriek describes a sharp, prolonged cry that, unlike an articulated distress call, is often an involuntary physiological response to extreme terror or an induced psychotic crisis. From a criminal psychology perspective, predatory stalking relies on social camouflage. By remaining silent and calm, the offender attempts to make the victim's erratic behavior appear like an isolated incident to witnesses, thereby delaying intervention. We had rented a cabin in northern Michigan, one of those wooden structures with a screened-in porch. The lower part of the porch walls was made of fixed glass, which allowed you to see the ground of the yard from the inside. I was lying there in a lounge chair, looking at the stars through the mesh and half drifting off with a beer in my hand. When I finally decided it was time to head to the bedroom to get some real rest, I made a clumsy move as I stood up. My beer bottle slipped, fell to the floor, and shattered with a sharp metallic-like crack against the wood. At the exact instant of impact, a bone-chilling scream came from outside, followed by 3 quick, violent thuds against the lower glass, right where my feet had been. I jumped back, ran inside the cabin, and flipped all the exterior lights on at once. I pressed myself against the main window to see what had hit the glass. There was nothing leaning against the house, but about 30 feet away, right in the middle of the yard, a massive cougar was standing there, staring straight at me. Its eyes glowed with a yellowish-white hue under the cabin's floodlights. The animal had curled up against the base of the house for the night, seeking warmth, and the noise of my bottle had startled it so badly that it reacted by clawing the glass before jumping into the yard to defend itself. In that moment, alone in the darkness and with my heart racing, I was convinced some spirit was attacking me, but it was just a 150-pound predator that I had accidentally woken up. Cultural note: the cougar puma concolor, also known as a mountain lion, is a large feline native to the Americas. While they are elusive animals, sightings in northern Michigan have increasingly confirmed their presence in the region. Their eyes possess a layer of tissue called the tapetum lucidum, which reflects light and grants them superior night vision. This produces the characteristic eye shine seen when they are illuminated by flashlights or security floodlights. From a behavioral standpoint, a cougar's scream is one of the most unsettling sounds in the North American wilderness, often sounding strikingly similar to a human in distress. We were spending a few days on our sailboat with our female greyhound, enjoying the calm of the harbor, until the silence was shattered that night. My sister woke up suddenly around 2 o'clock in the morning. Many people don't realize how incredibly far sound travels over water. Every whisper on the pier echoed inside the cabin, as if they were inches away from us. It was several men. They had stopped right next to our boat, and were talking brazenly about our dog. One of them was explaining his plan. They wanted to breed our greyhound with their hunting dogs to get faster offspring. They remarked that greyhounds usually have large litters, and that they could sell each puppy to other wild pig hunters for a fortune. "It's going to be like Christmas," one of the guys blurted out with a stifled laugh that made our stomachs churn. We heard their boots hitting the wooden planks of the pier as they moved even closer. The sailboat rocked gently with the weight of the men leaning against the gunwale. Suddenly, one of them leaned over and pressed his face against the porthole window to look inside. My sister stayed completely motionless, holding her breath in the darkness, praying the dog wouldn't bark. "There's someone sleeping in there. We'll come back later," one said before they walked away. In that harbor, the police are too far away for a call to be of any immediate help. We spent the rest of the early morning huddled together in a terrifying silence, listening to every creak of the pier and fearing they would return with tools to force their way in. As soon as dawn broke, we urgently called for a taxi. When we stepped out onto the deck, we saw that the danger hadn't left. They had 2 vans parked on either side of the main pier gate. The sliding doors of the vehicles were open, and the men were grouped in 2 rows, forcing us to pass right through the middle of them if we wanted to leave. Fortunately, our taxi arrived quickly. The driver was a massive Micronesian man with broad shoulders and a steady gaze. We signaled for him to drive through the pier gate. He got out, walked toward us, and escorted us with authority, keeping us and the dog in the center, protected by his physical presence as we passed in front of the men by the vans. The men simply watched, but they didn't dare move. If we hadn't overheard their conversation that night, we would have walked straight into their trap. It was an escape by a split second. Cultural note: the greyhound is prized in hunting communities for being the fastest land mammal after the cheetah, reaching speeds of 45 miles per hour. In rural regions of Oceania and Australia, crossing greyhounds with scent hounds or terriers is a common practice to create lurchers, hybrid dogs, specialized in hunting feral pigs or boars. Furthermore, in nautical culture, a porthole is a circular window designed to withstand water pressure. However, in recreational marinas, these can compromise privacy due to the close proximity of passers-by on the docks if opaque curtains are not utilized. I lived in a duplex for several years, and practically from day one, I started noticing that something wasn't right. I would hear strange noises, as if someone were constantly moving around on a floor above us, dragging objects, or walking with a heavy step. The only big problem was that we lived in a single-story building. There was no second floor, only a dark, narrow attic above our heads. Sometimes paranoia got the best of me. I would think of the worst-case scenario that someone was secretly living in our attic, a squatter hidden among the rafters. However, I would reassure myself by thinking that if that person tried to come down into the apartment, we would bound to hear them. To get out of the attic, they would have to step on the washer or the dryer, and then open some accordion doors that were old, squeaky, and naturally loud. It was impossible for anyone to enter or leave without waking the whole house. One night, the situation changed. My daughter felt sick and vomited on our bed in the middle of the night, so my wife and I ended up sleeping on the living room sofa. Suddenly, in the middle of the deathly silence, I heard a metallic crunching noise coming from the kitchen. It was right in my line of sight from the sofa, but the darkness was so dense that I couldn't distinguish anything. I froze, listening to that dry, rhythmic sound that I couldn't identify. The next morning, the first thing my wife did when she woke up was ask me if I had also heard the noises in the kitchen. It wasn't my imagination. I decided to spend several nights in a row sleeping on the sofa, determined to catch whoever was responsible. The noise repeated several times each night, like a macabre cycle. Finally, early one morning I managed to catch what was happening. It wasn't a ghost or a human intruder. A massive rat had been sneaking into the kitchen. The crunching and metallic noise that was keeping us awake was the sound of the animal passing through a narrow gap between the wood and the metal of the structure, and then walking over the cold linoleum. Once we discovered it, everything made sense. The attic noises, the scratching in the walls, and that constant feeling that someone else was sharing our home. The mystery of the intruder ended up being a battle against a very cunning pest. Cultural note: linoleum is a floor-covering material made from solidified linseed oil, wood flour, or cork, very common in older North American kitchens due to its durability and low cost. It was 3 o'clock in the morning and I was completely absorbed, sitting in front of the screen playing Xbox in the absolute silence of the early hours. Suddenly, the tranquility was shattered in the most violent way possible. A guy kicked the front door of my house with brutal force. The crash was so loud that out of pure shock I fell backward out of my chair, landing flat on the floor without understanding what was happening. As I tried to react from the ground, I saw a black shadow streak across the living room at full speed. It was my 100-pound black Labrador. I literally saw him fly through the house. He made an impressive leap and tackled the intruder, slamming him backward with all his weight just as the guy was trying to cross the threshold. What followed was a surreal scene. My dog threw himself on top of him, but not in the way you'd expect from an attack dog. He was smothering him with kisses. However, the guy didn't see it that way. Between the weight of the animal, the darkness, and the sheer ferocity of the encounter, the intruder was screaming in absolute horror, as if he were being fed feet first into a wood chipper. The man's panic was real. He thought the dog was tearing him to pieces. Finally, I managed to get to my feet and ran toward the door. I only caught a glimpse of the guy fleeing in desperation, running down the street with all his might while my dog, hot on his heels, chasing him with an energy I had never seen in him before. I called the police immediately. They arrived within a few minutes, and I gave them the report of what happened, still shaking from the adrenaline. About 20 minutes later, while I was still talking to the officers, I saw my dog coming back. He was walking calmly down the street, wagging his tail with an expression of total satisfaction, as if what had just happened was the best thing in the world. One of the police officers, seeing him so relaxed, asked me if the dog was friendly. I remember just staring at him and saying, "To be honest, I thought he was." My dog had always been the biggest goofball of a Labrador in the world, an animal that only looked for affection, pets, and giving kisses to anyone who crossed his path. At least, that's what I believed until someone decided to kick my door down at 3 o'clock in the morning. That day, I understood that even the gentlest soul knows when it's time to protect the family. Cultural note: the Labrador Retriever is one of the most popular dog breeds in the United States, valued primarily for its docile temperament, intelligence, and extremely friendly nature, which generally disqualifies them as protective or guard dogs. However, an adult male can weigh between 65 and 100 pounds. Combined with their muscular build and strong loyalty instincts, this makes them a considerable physical force in direct confrontation scenarios. It was the early hours of the morning and I was wide awake, wasting time on the internet like I do almost every night. Everyone else in the house had gone to bed a long time ago. Suddenly, I started hearing a metallic clanging coming from the deck. At first, I decided to ignore the noise. I figured it was just the wind rattling the lid of a trash can that I had hung over the bird feeder myself. The idea was to make it difficult for squirrels to steal the seeds, but the racket kept going, and my mind started racing. It must be a raccoon, I thought. Maybe it got into the grill looking for leftovers. Or maybe there were 2 of them in there trying to make more raccoons. But the noise wouldn't stop. It was a constant metallic clashing that was starting to drive me crazy. I got up, walked toward the sliding glass door, and flipped on the porch lights. They were those old energy-saving bulbs that take about a week to fully warm up, so at first I could barely see anything, and what little I could make out looked normal. However, whatever was making that noise didn't stop when the light came on. By that point, I was getting nervous. It bothered me to feel that way, and it bothered me even more that a stupid trash panda had me on edge. So, in a burst of courage and annoyance, I slid the door open, stuck my head out, and asked sarcastically, "Can I help you with something?" About 10 to 20 feet away, a bear stared back at me. He was standing upright on his hind legs, which made him look just as tall as I am. He had his front claws gripped onto the bird feeder, which, despite the animal's best efforts to rip it off, was still attached to the side of the house. I stood there for a few seconds, completely frozen, until my brain's recognition software finished processing the image and decided that, yes, that was an actual bear. I jumped back inside the house. When I looked through the glass again, the bear was gone, leaving behind a mangled bird feeder and a severely dented trash can lid. Since that night, we don't hang bird feeders at the house anymore. Cultural note: CFL compact fluorescent lamp bulbs were very popular before the mass adoption of LEDs. One of their most criticized technical flaws was their warm-up time, often requiring up to 3 minutes to reach maximum brightness, especially in cold climates. Furthermore, in various regions of North America, wildlife experts strongly advise against using bird feeders during bear activity seasons. Birdseed is a highly attractive, high-calorie food source that can lure these plantigrades toward human dwellings, leading to dangerous encounters and habituation. I was crossing the country on a road trip with a couple of friends. To save money on hotels, we decided to camp out in the open. We didn't even have a tent. We just threw a tarp over the bed of the truck and settled in there. It's incredibly hard for me to fall asleep outside of my own bed, so I stayed awake long after my friends had passed out. As I lay there, the sole witness to a night that felt far too heavy and silent, I started to notice a strange sensation. It was like a void in my stomach, a hollow feeling that made my insides churn. I thought it was just hunger, so I went to the cab, found something to eat, and tried to force myself to sleep. I managed to drift off for a bit, but when I suddenly woke up, the feeling was still there, only this time it was much worse. It wasn't hunger. It was that cold, deep knot in your stomach that screams, "Something is very wrong here." I looked around, but nothing was out of place. Just the total darkness of the countryside. I tried to ignore it, and closed my eyes again. About an hour must have passed when I woke up again, but now my body was in total chaos. All my internal alarms were going off. I was shaking, and my heart was hammering against my ribs in absolute fight or flight mode. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I shook my friends awake and demanded that we leave right that second. I managed to convince them, and we sped off. I told them I'd explain everything in the morning. We found another campsite a few miles away to finish out the night, but what happened next was what truly made my blood run cold. I was sleeping soundly when suddenly my friends were the ones waking me up. They were pale, terrified, practically trying to lift me up to get me into the truck. As soon as I opened my eyes, an indescribable dread hit me, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. We didn't see anyone. We didn't hear anything, but it felt as if death itself was standing right behind us, watching us from the brush. We took off and drove for hours without looking back, until we reached a large city and holed up in a hotel. One of my friends swore we were being followed on one stretch of the road, but in that darkness, it was impossible to be sure. We never found out what was stalking us that night, but it was the first time I understood that sometimes your body knows you're in danger long before your mind does. Cultural note: the fight or flight instinct is an evolutionary physiological response to the perception of an imminent threat, where the sympathetic nervous system releases catecholamines like adrenaline. In wilderness camping environments, the brain can process infrasonic stimuli, sound frequencies below the human auditory threshold, or minute changes in the environment that trigger sensations of extreme dread, anxiety, and nausea, even if the threat is not consciously detected by sight or hearing. In the United States, these types of transcontinental routes via backroads often traverse areas with zero cellular coverage, increasing isolation and vulnerability to safety incidents. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. I was up late playing video games by myself in the house, around 3 o'clock in the morning. My dad worked the graveyard shift and usually didn't get back until daylight, but sometimes he would drop by the house for his lunch break in the middle of the night, grab a quick bite, and head right back to work. Suddenly, I heard clear as day the front door lock clicking open, followed by the sound of the door swinging inward, and footsteps entering the house. I paused my game immediately and yelled down the hallway, "Hey, Dad!" He always answered back, but this time, there was absolute silence. I called out down the hallway again, "Dad, is that you?" Nothing. Not a single word. I felt my heart sink straight into my stomach, and I just sat there, frozen in pure fear. I stayed in my chair for a few seconds processing the noise, and then I got up. I walked very slowly down the hallway toward the entryway. The door was closed, with a deadbolt locked and everything. I turned on every single light in the house and started searching every corner. I was terrified, thinking someone had broken in and was hiding in one of the rooms, but I found no one. The next morning, I asked my dad if by any chance he had come home and left quickly, but he told me that he had brought his lunch with him from the start that night and never came back to eat. It's been over 10 years now, and I still think about that night. I can't explain what happened. I heard the lock, the door, and someone walking into the house as clear as crystal, but no one came in. It simply makes no sense. There is a narrow strip of trees, bushes, and wild brush that separates my neighborhood from the one behind it. It's barely 10 feet of thick vegetation, just enough to create a visual barrier between the houses. One night, after 10 p.m., I was in the backyard focused on reading a book, taking advantage of the early morning peace. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable crunch of someone walking on dry leaves. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was a small animal, but the steps sounded heavy. Must be a deer, I told myself, and went back to my book. Because I had the porch light on, my eyes were adjusted to the brightness, and I couldn't see more than a few yards into the darkness of the yard. The crunching continued, slow and deliberate, getting closer and closer to my property. In this suburb, the lots are narrow, about 50 feet wide, so you can hear everything. When the noise reached a point right behind my neighbor's house, a chill ran down my spine. I realized I was only hearing 2 rhythmic footsteps, not 4 like a deer or any other local animal would make. "Hey!" I shouted into the blackness, but there was no answer. The footsteps didn't stop. They kept advancing with a terrifying calmness. I immediately turned off the porch light to stop being under the spotlight and to be the one watching from the shadows. "Yeah, prowling around at night isn't a good look," I said in a firm voice, "but it's an excellent way to get yourself shot." Being in North Carolina, I wasn't joking. I've always been the paranoid type when it comes to security. I replaced my door frames with reinforced steel strike plates and 3-inch screws. I double lock everything at all times and have security bars in the tracks of the sliding glass doors. My doors are locked 24/7, but I know that if someone really wants to get in, they'll try. That's why this area is known for its firearms. Around here, we assume every puddle has an alligator and every house has a rifle. I kept hoping it was an animal, and that I was just scared for no reason, but I preferred to bet on my safety. Shouting at a deer in the night is something you laugh about later. Staying quiet while a killer enters your yard is not. But it wasn't an animal. As soon as I finished speaking, the footsteps froze for a second, and then I heard the person take off running in desperation in the opposite direction toward the neighborhood behind mine. I was in shock. Since that night, I never fail to set the house alarm. Cultural note: North Carolina is a state with a deeply rooted self-defense culture, where open carry laws and the castle doctrine allow citizens to protect their private property. Furthermore, a reinforced strike plate secured with 3-inch 7.6 centimeter screws is a home security upgrade recommended by experts to prevent doors from being kicked in, as standard screws are typically short and easily rip out of the wooden door frame. To give you some context, our house is set pretty far back from the main road and has an incredibly long driveway. Also, it's the oldest building on the block. It was the original farmhouse before the land was sold off and turned into this subdivided neighborhood. On the detached garage, which is separate from the house, we have a massive floodlight mounted on a pole. It's one of those lights farmers used to use to illuminate the fields during late-night harvests. That light has an absurd power level. It's like having a miniature sun. It can light up the entire field and even reach into the neighbors' backyards, which is why we never use it, so we don't end up with the whole neighborhood hating us. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was at my computer when I heard something out of the ordinary. A motorcycle engine suddenly cut off right at the entrance of my property. I cracked the window open a bit to listen better, and froze. The owner of the bike was pushing it on foot, in silence, coming up our driveway toward the backyard. We had a gate in the fence, but it didn't have a padlock, and I heard the guy start fumbling with the latch. I yelled in my most threatening voice, "Who's there?" There was no answer, but I felt the guy freeze in place. Right then, I had an idea to scare him for life. I sprinted downstairs and flipped the switch for the farm light. It was as if a nuclear bomb had detonated over our yard. The sky lit up, the ground glowed, and the neighbors' houses were bathed in white light. I'm sure I woke up half the neighborhood. But most importantly, the guy was exposed. A man dressed in black with a backpack over his shoulder. I heard him let out a panicked, "Oh, crap!" He immediately started his bike and throttled it hard, making a deafening noise as he fled in terror from my garden. There had been a series of thefts in garages and barns in the area where expensive tools were being taken. I was surely his next target, but he didn't count on me having the switch to an artificial sun in my hands. I was in the Navy and became very good friends with another guy from my unit. One day, we decided to head to West Virginia to visit his family at the house where he grew up. Since we were passing through, a few of his other friends also came along and stayed the night. My friend and I were sharing his full-size bed in his basement bedroom, a place that, once the lights went out, became so dark you couldn't even see your own hands. I woke up in the middle of the night, completely alert for no apparent reason. Upon opening my eyes, I clearly saw a dark figure walking back and forth, pacing just at the foot of the bed. The fear I felt was indescribable, a pure terror that paralyzes your muscles. At that moment, my brain tried to find a logical explanation. I figured it was one of his other friends being a jerk or trying to be scary. So I closed my eyes and pretended to be fast asleep, waiting for him to get bored and leave. However, the presence remained. The rhythm of the footsteps was constant. Finally, anger got the better of my fear, and I bolted upright to confront who I thought was his friend, determined to cuss him out for scaring me like that. But there was no one there. The basement was in complete silence, and the figure had simply vanished into thin air. The next morning, I told my friend what I had seen during the night. As soon as I finished talking, his face changed completely. He went pale and looked at me with genuine terror. He forced me to go to the kitchen and tell his mother exactly the same thing. It turns out, he had seen the exact same figure, pacing the same path, repeatedly throughout his entire childhood. But his mother had never believed him. Seeing a stranger, someone who knew nothing about the house's history, described the same apparition was the proof he had needed his whole life. It's been years since my Navy service, but thinking about that silhouette moving in the darkness of that basement still gives me goosebumps. Cultural note: West Virginia is a state known for its mountainous terrain and isolated rural communities, where many older homes feature basements originally used for coal or food storage. The phenomenon of shadow people is one of the most frequent paranormal reports in American popular culture. Witnesses typically describe dark, human-like silhouettes that lack facial features and are often perceived through peripheral vision or in states of deep darkness before disappearing when directly confronted. I've told this story before, but it remains one of my favorites, even though it was a nightmare at the time. When I had just become a mother, shortly after my grandmother passed away, we went to visit her lakeside cabin in a fairly remote rural area. It was a small 2-story structure with the bedrooms located on the upper floor. My son was only between 4 and 6 weeks old. I was very worried that his cries from hunger or his process of adjusting to the world would end up waking my entire family in the middle of the night. The inevitable happened. My baby started getting restless and wouldn't stop crying. So as not to disturb the others, I decided to take my little one out onto the porch for some fresh night air, thinking that might calm him down. The original cabin had burned to the ground, only the chimney remained a couple of years prior and had been completely rebuilt. I didn't know the technical details or the quirks of the new house very well. I walked out confidently, but apparently the door could be opened from the inside without a problem, even if the exterior lock was engaged. There I was, in the middle of nowhere, locked out of the house at 3 o'clock in the morning with a newborn in my arms. I panicked. I banged on the door and tried to turn the handle over and over again, but it wouldn't budge. Desperate, I started throwing small pebbles and then larger rocks at my husband's second-story window, but nothing woke him up. The silence of the countryside swallowed every noise. I sat on the ground, defeated, leaning my back against the wooden door, on the verge of losing my cool and crying along with my son. Suddenly, in the midst of that absolute silence, I heard a sharp sound click. The door had unlocked itself. That same door I had tried to open dozens of times simply opened. Through the door's window I could see the entire ground floor perfectly. It was empty and dark. When the sun came up, everyone told me they had slept soundly, and that no one had gotten up or heard a thing. No one came down to let me in, but the door unlocked exactly when I needed it most. There was a time when I worked cleaning movie theaters. It was exhausting work, and our shifts usually started at 2 o'clock in the morning once the last moviegoer had left, and the building was in absolute silence. One of those boring midweek nights, I decided to go out into the parking lot to pick up the accumulated trash. It must have been around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning. The theater was located right next to a busy main avenue, so anyone driving by could perfectly see everything happening in the parking lot, even at that hour. I was completely in my own world. I had my headphones on with the music blasted, and in my hand, I was carrying one of those trash grabber tools, that long metal claw we use to pick up nasty things off the ground without touching them. Suddenly, I felt my phone vibrate. It was a call from my manager, who was inside the building supervising other areas. "Hey," she told me as soon as I answered. "I just saw on the cameras that a truck pulled into the parking lot and is heading right toward you. We aren't expecting any vendors today. Be careful." As she was telling me this, the truck screeched to a halt right next to me. A man began to open the door purposefully. There was an eternal instant, a second of silence where time stood still. The guy started to step out of the vehicle, but at that exact moment, he realized two things. First, that I was on the phone talking to someone, and second, that I had the metal grabber resting over my shoulder, holding it like a steel baseball bat. He froze. He looked at my hands, then stared directly into my eyes with an expression I can never forget, and dropped a line completely out of place. "Looks like it might snow today." Without saying another word, he slammed the door shut and sped off at full throttle, disappearing into the darkness of the avenue. I stood there shaking. I am 100% sure that if my manager hadn't called me at that exact second, that man would have attempted to force me into his truck. Seeing me communicating with someone and holding an object that resembled a weapon made him back down. After that, I warned the entire crew that no one was going out to pick up trash until the sun came up, and that under no circumstances should they ever lower their guard. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was still awake in my parents' living room, focused on finishing an essay for school. My boyfriend at the time lived with us, and his bedroom was at the end of a hallway that connected directly to the living room. Right at the beginning of that hallway, closer to where I was sitting, with a bathroom and another bedroom. I had been glued to the screen for hours, so I decided to look away for a second to give my mind a break. At that exact moment, a sudden movement caught my attention. When I looked up toward the door frame leading to the hallway, I clearly saw a face partially peeking out. Before I could say anything, the person bolted from their hiding spot and made an agile leap to hide behind the love seat right next to my chair. My immediate reaction was relief mixed with annoyance. "It's my boyfriend," I thought. I knew I was distracted with work, and it was exactly the kind of thing he would do to jump scare me. I got up from my chair with a triumphant smile, walked over to the sofa and leaned over the edge while saying, "Ha ha, very funny, but I saw you perfectly." There was no one there. The space behind the sofa was completely empty. I stood there, my heart starting to race, trying to find a logical explanation. There was no way someone could have left that spot without me seeing them, since I was facing the only exit. While I was still standing there, processing what happened, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening at the end of the hallway. It was my boyfriend's room. I saw him walk out with a clumsy gait, half asleep, and rubbing his eyes, heading straight for the bathroom. He hadn't even gotten out of bed until that very moment. I still have no idea what I saw jumping toward my side that night, but the feeling that something hid just inches away from me will stay with me forever. Like many of us back then, I was glued to my console. The original Modern Warfare 2 had just dropped, and I had my entire wrestling team logged onto their Xboxes. It was awesome. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the summer night air was blowing in through my 2 open windows. Between bites of my pizza rolls and the game's UAV online alerts, I swear I heard someone say, "Help me." It spooks you a bit when you're not entirely sure, especially since it's not a phrase you hear very often. I paused the game and pulled one side of my Turtle Beach headset off to listen closer. About half a minute passed. Nothing. I told my friends over the party chat, but they just clowned on me, saying I was imagining things. I brushed it off. Then I clearly heard someone say, "Help me" again. This time I took my headset off completely and just waited. It happened faster. This time there it was, for a third time, a voice I didn't recognize asking, "Can anyone help me?" There was a desperation in that voice that made your blood run cold. The basement level of the house where I was gaming is at ground level, with the window sitting barely a foot off the ground right beneath the wooden deck. I was sitting 3 feet away from that window, feeling my teenage soul leave my body out of sheer terror. I sprinted upstairs in a panic and alerted my parents, so wearing our pajamas and armed with nothing more than a BB gun, we went outside to investigate. It turned out that an elderly woman with dementia had gone missing a few hours prior and ended up wandering into our backyard. She had fallen and was delirious. We called the police, and she was transported to the hospital. She was confused but sustained no physical injuries. I'm glad I was able to help her that day, and it also felt good to prove my friends wrong. It felt right. It's been about 15 years since then. At the time, it shook me up, sure, but it didn't affect me too deeply because I was young. Now, looking back after all this time, I realize people were right. That situation could have ended much worse, so much worse. Always keep an ear out for what's happening outside, travelers. Cultural note. Turtle Beach was an iconic headset brand for the gaming community during the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 era, known for popularizing high-fidelity audio and independent voice chat on consoles. Meanwhile, a UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, is a military term for a reconnaissance drone, which was one of the most common and recognizable kill streak rewards in the 2009 video game Call of Duty: Modern Warfare 2. It wasn't exactly when everyone was sleeping, but rather a night when I decided to go to bed early. We were in the middle of a vacation, and my grandmother's house was packed with relatives staying overnight. Since no one wanted to share a bed with her, I volunteered to give up mine after all. Her bed was a king size and much more comfortable than mine, so I was coming out ahead. The only strange thing was that my grandmother had never removed the original plastic protector from the mattress. So every time you moved, it crunched like a bag of potato chips. The house wasn't large. From the bedroom, I could perfectly hear the laughter and conversations of my family in the living room, barely 20 feet away. I left the hallway light on and the door cracked open so I wouldn't feel so isolated. I had only had my eyes closed for a few minutes when I felt the foot of the bed sink, as if someone had sat down, followed by the unmistakable crunch of the plastic. I opened my eyes expecting to see my grandmother, but what I saw made every hair on my body stand up. There was no one there. As I lay there paralyzed, it happened again. I felt a second depression in the mattress, this time closer to me, and I saw with my own eyes how the comforter gave way under invisible pressure, as if someone were walking across the mattress toward where I was. The plastic crunched loudly again under that non-existent weight. I dove under the covers in one jump, not daring to look for 10 eternal minutes. While I waited for something to grab me, I began counting the voices coming from the other room. Everyone was there. No one was missing. There was no way someone could have played a prank on me without me hearing the door or footsteps in the hallway. There was no space under the bed to hide. I was wide awake, with the hallway light illuminating the room, and I watched something invisible approach me. The most terrifying part wasn't the darkness, but knowing my family was just a few steps away, and even so, something was there with me in the bed. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.